Thank you, Frank, and I can vouch. Him is there at church. He may fish after church, but he's there, and it's good to see Teeny Wade. She and Wade are both here. Jean and Teeny are both here. Why aren't y'all at home? Y'all just like gypsies. Y'all just hit the road, and but I don't know if the elders sent them down here to confirm that I was, actually going to be here, because if you tell your elders, well, I'm speaking in Gulf Shores, and they go, well, yeah, but where? What stretch of the beach are you going to be speaking on? So y'all can go back and vouch for the fact that I was here. And that I thought I had one of my daughters locked into coming. The other one is taking classes, and she works, so the other one is technically off on Thursday. She says, but I could get off Wednesday if you wanted me to go. I said, that'd be great. And she says, now if I go, do I have to go to church? I said, well, yeah, you're not going to walk the beach while I'm preaching. She goes, well, I'll just stay here and go to church. So anyway, I missed out on that too. But in any case, I am thrilled to be here. And normally when we come down for summer vacation, then we've always enjoyed the opportunity to worship with you on Sunday. And I don't know of a place, I was telling Frank and I told the Langs during supper, I don't know of a place with a more unique work than you have here. Because you have an indigenous body that loves the Lord, and you make room for people that come in. They may be here this Sunday, they may not be here next Sunday. You don't know if you're going to have 500 or 700 or ever how many the summer schedule will allow, and yet regardless, you open your hearts up, and it would be very tempting. It would be very tempting for you to draw back, for you to kind of draw inward, and not reach out and not try to get close to people that, okay, I may see them once or twice a year, but I don't get that impression at all. And listening to the works that you're involved in, and you've been involved in Cuba, you've been involved in so many other parts of the world, and great things are happening here at the church at Gulf Shores, and great things are in store. And to be a part, I started to say finally, because every time I've been here, I would see Ray on the way out, and I would drop hints about, coming and speaking, and it never registered with him until now. So, no, that's not completely true, just part. But to be, and after that you go, well, we know why. Ray and I go back at least 10 or 12 years ago, and to be able to visit with him is a blessing. It's a reminder that regardless of how big we get and how much territory we cover, the church is a close-knit family, not only on a local level, but throughout the course of the world. And you can visit somewhere and talk, and you'll connect with somebody, and you guarantee you know somebody mutually, and just through the course of association. So to be able to be here tonight and share with you is indeed a great blessing, and especially with the topic at hand. I want to, and I have taken opportunity over the course of the last several weeks to go back and revisit Galatians chapter 5, and my subject matter tonight is that part of the fruit of the Spirit where Paul just simply says kindness. What I find unique, and I'm not privileged or apprised of what you have had thus far in the series. I don't know if you're taking these in order, or if it just depends on when the speaker can come. So if they're not in order, that's fine. If they are in order, that's okay too. But when you look at this section of the book of Galatians, I notice this every time I get to this section of verse 22 and 23. That all of this is predicated by what we read beginning in verse 19, where Paul begins by saying, now the works of the flesh are plain, and he begins to highlight and categorize what the works of the flesh are. And you'll notice that works there is plural. And then by contrast, when you get to verse 22, he says, but the fruit, singularly. The fruit of the Spirit is what? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such there is no law. And what that tells me is, though there's a plurality of works of the flesh, the fruit of the Spirit is singular. In that, when you go through this characterization of how the Spirit evidences himself in your life and in my life, it's not a buffet line. It's not a cafeteria where you go through and say, well, yeah, everybody likes love, and I need to be more patient. Yeah, I could be a little more joyful, but I'm not really concerned about kindness, and I certainly don't want self-control. No, this is not an either-or proposition. You take it in its entirety. And what the other aspect of this is that when you read 19 and 20 and 21, and then contrast that with 22 and 23, all of these parts of the fruit of the Spirit are the direct opposite of the works of the flesh. In fact, I would go as far as to say that when you begin to look at that list of the works of the flesh, all of them find their beginning, all of them find their origin in selfishness. They're all generated because of some inward desire or some selfish motivation. I mean, you just go through the list: fornication, impurity, licentiousness, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, and so on. It's all about me. So that when we get to the topic tonight, kindness, by the way, Ray, when am I through? When y'all get up and leave, or 8? Wow. Go home and Tina and tell them that they stay till 8 o'clock. Okay, all right. Well, it's worth a shot. But when you begin to look at this concept of kindness, well, what is it? It's like a story I read about. A lady was standing there at a bus stop, and she saw a man go up to another man who was poorly dressed, and he handed the man some money and whispered in his ear. And the lady thought, well, that was a nice gesture. So she went over there, and she gave him $10, and she whispered in his ear, never despair. Never despair. The next day, she's at the same bus stop, and the shabbily dressed man, same man, walks up to her and gives her $110. And she said, what's this? He said, never despair, paid 10 to 1. Every act of kindness is going to cost you something. And kindness doesn't always pay 10 to 1, but it has within its capacity an opportunity to be a reflection of Jesus. But it's also a fruit of the Spirit. Kindness is love in action. And as I began to think about this is one of the redeeming aspects, I think, of Bible study, and especially when it comes to the New Testament. We can read passages like this in Galatians 5 or in any other part of the letters of Paul or John or Peter or James, and what I find so reassuring is we can talk about a concept and then go back to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and Jesus has already modeled it. He has already embodied that particular characteristic. And when we talk about kindness tonight, this is certainly the case. I want you to turn to Luke chapter 8, because what I'd like to do very, very simply tonight is to look at 3 incidences in the ministry of Jesus that I think model, illustrate, emulate, if you will, this concept of kindness. Because, yes, it's love in action, but it's an attribute that doesn't come naturally. Children are not born kind. And any of you that have kept the nursery on Sunday know that to be a fact. If you've got children, if you've got grandchildren, this is not something that they're born with. It takes practice, and it takes a lot of reminding with little ones especially. Luke chapter 8, and we're going to begin in verse 40. Now, I'll go ahead and tell you there is a parallel to this in Mark chapter 5, and I tend to spend more time in Mark's gospel than I do the other 3 if it's the same story or the same miracle. I don't know, for some reason I just like Mark, and he's very, direct. Mark is very, he gets right to the point, and he does the same thing with this. And so I'm going to kind of flip back and forth between Mark 5 and here in Luke chapter 8. And Luke tells us about two different people who came in direct contact with the kindness of Jesus. But they're very different. One was a man, the other a woman. The woman was destitute. She would be what we might call a bag lady. Just completely impoverished. The man, on the other hand, was not a politician necessarily, but he was a ruler. He was wealthy. He was a man of means. And yet both of them received the same thing from Jesus. And what I'd like to do is just kind of walk through this and then make some observations because they are familiar stories. They're familiar instances. And what sets this up, if you remember, is Jesus has been across the Sea of Galilee, and he has had an interesting point of interaction with a man who had been possessed by multiple demons. He cast the demons out, and the demons are given permission to go into a herd of swine, and those pigs go down the cliff and are drowned in the Sea of Galilee. The herdsmen see that, go back and tell the villagers, and on one of those rare occasions, the villagers came back and basically asked Jesus to leave. Mark tells us in his account it's because when they saw and I don't know, I've never seen 2,000 pigs floating in a body of water either, but they see that, and Mark is very clear to point out when they saw that, they then go and find Jesus, and they saw the man who had been possessed. He was dressed. He was in his right mind. When they saw him, Mark says, then they were afraid. And the question is, of what were they afraid? Well, that whole concept of fear is an integral theme in the way Mark presents this, and Luke brings this out as well. So they come back across the Sea of Galilee. They no more get out of the boat, verse 40, and Luke tells us a crowd was already waiting for him, and there came a man named Jairus who was a ruler of the synagogue, and falling at Jesus' feet, he besought him to come to his house. Why? Because he had a 12-year-old daughter, his only child, and she was dying. And you know, what strikes me about this is the first thing that Jesus gives both of these individuals is his attention. And all these points start with the letter A, so that's so I can remember it, and maybe you can remember it too. But he gives them the gift of attention. He hears about this sick child, and automatically she takes priority over whatever else he had planned. He had just come back from a very exhausting time over there in uncharted territory, if you will, and he comes back, and he may have thought, okay, I'd like to, maybe go to Peter's house here in Capernaum and just kind of rest a little bit, but no, this need takes priority over it. And we need to look at that on occasion, and sometimes our schedules are interrupted, and if it's for something good, if it's for something that's going to advance the kingdom of God, we don't look at those as annoyances, but we look at them as opportunities. And so he shows attention. But notice he gets very, very personal about this. Jairus says, she's my only daughter, she's 12 years old, and she was dying. So it's automatic. They're going to make their way from wherever they are along the Sea of Galilee to wherever Jairus lives, and they're making their way through the village. And as they're traveling or making their way through, Luke tells us that the people were all around him. In fact, Mark tells us that they were going from where they were to the town, and in the process they had to go through this little suburb, and the people were just pressing in all around him. Verse 43 tells us, and a woman who had an issue of blood for 12 years and could not be healed by anyone came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment. Now, one of the interesting parts of this is if you'll go back to Mark chapter 5, Mark adds in his narrative, the woman had struggled with an issue of blood for 12 years, and she had been to many physicians and had spent all of her money and had not gotten any better but had gotten worse. Now, Luke doesn't record that. Why do you think Luke would leave that out? Yeah, because he's a doctor. So he just says she could not be healed by anyone. And both are accurate, but this is what I love about Mark. He just has to add, she'd spent all of her money going to doctors. But the woman, had it in her mind that if I can just touch the hem of his garment, then I'll be healed. And this is another aspect of that attention. He gave Jairus his attention by saying, okay, let's go. And by the way, this is another aspect of this. Jesus has already proven at this point in his ministry that he doesn't have to go to a person. He's already healed at a distance, has he not? He has healed another ruler of the synagogue's servant. By the time you get home, your servant will be well. But Jairus wants him to come and touch his daughter. And Jesus gives him his attention. And in the process of going, this woman reaches out and touches him. Jesus stops, Luke says, verse 45, and he said, who was it that touched me? And the apostles said, what are you, I'm paraphrasing, and said, what are you, crazy? I mean, all these people bumping up against you, who are you going to say, who touched me? And Jesus says, no, someone touched me because I felt the power go forth from me. And it was at that point the woman realizes, okay, what I had hoped to avoid has now been detected. You see, it's very easy for us to sit here tonight and read a passage like this, okay? What does that mean? She suffered with an issue of blood for 12 years. We don't understand. It wasn't just the illness. It wasn't just the cost involved. She had been considered ceremonially unclean. She could not go to synagogue with her family. She could not participate in Passover or any of the religious holidays. She could not enjoy the embrace of her husband or her children. She was basically an outcast. But Jesus gives both of these individuals his attention. The fact that he says, verse 46, someone touched me because I perceived that power has gone forth from me. And Mark mentions in his account, and when the woman heard this, she was afraid. We mentioned earlier, kindness has this capability of costing you something. I illustrated that at the beginning, and it's the same thing whether it's on an individual level or collectively as a body. And we need to remember that the church, as the family of God, is to be a place that internalizes, can we say, or tries to reach out to people on a personal level, not like the 911 service I read about in a large city. Individual called 911. The recording said, if this is a burglary, press 1. If the burglar is in your house, press 2. If the burglar is chasing you, press 3 quickly. The church has got to be more than that. And we as believers and we as followers of Jesus need to be sure that we give people our attention. And I mentioned this earlier in our discussion at supper. Sometimes where we have kind of missed the point, I think, is a lot of times we try to do everything on Sunday morning. And you can't do that. At some point, you step out of that format, and there is a call, there is a note, there's some way of reaching out to someone on a personal level. And Em and I were talking about visitation. You realize that when it comes to calling on people that have visited your assembly, if the preacher calls, if the preacher goes and knocks on their door, there's about a 30% chance that they'll come back. But if a regular member goes, there's an 80% chance that they'll come back. Now, why is that? Because they're expecting the preacher to be there. They think, well, yeah, that's, you didn't really go out of your way. That's just what you're supposed to do. But for somebody else to go to the effort to write that note or to make that call or to go and make that visit, the percentages go way up, and it tells me that all these years the wrong people have been visiting. So, but there's part of kindness is the gift of attention. Secondly, Jesus gives these two people the gift of affirmation. Affirmation. Okay, what are you talking about? Well, he does this in two ways. He affirms, especially this individual that has touched him. He affirms her by what he did. I mean, he healed her. I mean, even indirectly, he stops and he says, okay, somebody touched me. I felt the power leave me. It's through what he did. And then secondly, he affirmed her through what he said. Because you look at verse 48, and he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. And I've often read that, and I thought, okay, why would he call her daughter? Was she that much younger? I mean, she'd been ill for 12 years. Jesus is 32-ish, somewhere in that neighborhood. Was she that much younger than him? No. The term daughter there was an intentional way of saying you may have been ostracized, you may have been isolated from the religious community before, but now you're back in. You're back in the family. And so he uses that term of affirmation by calling her daughter. Now, she can go back into the synagogue. She can participate in Passover and the other religious festivals. She can be involved with her family. Why? Because she's back in. And every time someone responds here, every time you sit down with someone and they pour their heart out and you listen to what they're struggling with and you pray with them and you tell them, this is something that I'm going to put at the top of my prayer list, you are affirming them. And so you can, this entire incident, I think, really draws us into, because while this is going on, where's Jairus? Remember the other guy? Well, he's over there on the side. Okay, let's go. Come on. This is great. I mean, this is fantastic. I'm glad she's well, but we got to go. And so, verse 49, while he was still speaking, a man from Jairus' house came and said to him, your daughter is dead. Do not trouble the teacher anymore. Now, here's a part of both of these accounts, whether it's in Mark 5 or in Luke chapter 8, that I just really find strange. And it's what Jesus turns and says to Jairus, and both recorded identically. That Jesus turns to him and said, do not be afraid, only believe, and she will be well. Now, I've looked at that. We've all been in those kinds of situations where maybe there was a relative that was in critical condition in ICU or emergency room or some part of a hospital, and there's a tremendous level of stress and anxiety because you're fearful that, okay, the medications might not do what they're supposed to do. The treatments might not have been exhaustive enough. The cancer may have spread. Whatever the scenario is, you have so many things to be fearful of until those words of finality come around and the doctor says, we've done all we can do, and it's just a matter of moments. And what had been a situation of fear has now become clearly a time of anxiety and grief. My question has always been, Jairus had so much to be afraid of before this. Jesus couldn't, might not can find him. He might not get there in time. And when he gets there, he may not can do anything. But now the word has come. Your daughter is dead. Don't bother the teacher anymore. So why would Jesus say to him then, don't be afraid? My question is, of what did Jairus have to be afraid of now? And I think it's one of the compelling aspects of human nature. Every time we hear of a tragic accident or some terminal illness and we lose someone, there's a part of us that just we go, wait a minute. That could be me. It's what the psychologists call catharsis. And we put ourselves in that situation. And Jesus anticipates this, and he tells Jairus, don't be afraid. And so they go, and they get to the house, and verse 52, all were weeping and bewailing. Mark says there was a tumult. Now, I'm not sure what a tumult is. You can do a little word study, but in Mark's account, he mentions that there was a tumult. In other words, there was a lot of open, expressive wailing and grieving. And verse 52, Jesus says, do not weep, for she's not dead, but she's asleep. Luke says, verse 53, and they laughed at him, knowing that she was dead. Now, the third gift that Jesus gives here is acceptance. You got attention, you got affirmation, and now you've got acceptance, excuse me. And Jesus chose not to respond to their abusive, behavior, to their lack of faith. Instead, he just turns his attention back to the subject at hand. Now, notice the difference. We talk about attention and we talk about affirmation. And as I said, the third one here is acceptance. I didn't say approval. There's a difference. There's a huge difference in acceptance and approval. I can accept someone without approving of their behavior. And I think sometimes in our attempts to make sure that we're clear on what the Bible says about conduct and about behavior and following the direction of the Spirit, that's all well and good. But sometimes we'll make acceptance and approval synonymous. And it's not until I can approve of every decision that you make or everything that you do, then I will accept you. And I don't know of anybody that can measure up to that. And sometimes parents will put our kids in a situation where we convey to them either directly or indirectly that, look, my love for you is conditioned on the decisions that you make or whether you do what's right or not. Well, guess what? Long about 16, 17 months old, they're not going to do what's right. And even in their little minds, they can come to the conclusion that, okay, mom and daddy don't love me anymore. Why? Because they don't always do what's right. Paul knew this. Romans 15 and verse 9. Accept one another just as Christ has accepted you. Now, if one so perfect as Jesus can be so accepting of you and of me, who's so imperfect, then maybe we need to be a little more accepting of each other. And I want you to understand clearly the distinction between acceptance and approval. So, Jesus acknowledges their lack of faith, and he does a very unusual thing. Mark tells us that he took Peter, James, and John and the little girl's parents, and they go up into her room. Nobody else is in the house. Verse 54, to me, is one of the most touching aspects of all the ministry of Jesus because he takes her by the hand, and Luke says, he looks down at her, and he says, "Child, arise." Mark now does it a little bit differently. Mark quotes the Aramaic. Mark tells us in Mark chapter 5 that Jesus takes the little girl's cold, dead hand and says, "Talitha kumi." And then he paraphrases for us. He knows, Mark knew, his readers were Romans. They didn't know Aramaic. And so he paraphrases. And he paraphrases Talitha kumi by saying, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." And I have heard preachers, get up and read that and with real dramatic inflection, I say to you, little girl, arise. Well, the problem with that is, Talitha Kumi doesn't mean, little girl, I say to you, arise. Not literally. Now, he paraphrases, and that's okay. I'm glad it's in there because it illustrates that even biblical writers paraphrase. All translations paraphrase. And for Mark to do that is nothing unusual. But here's the thing about it, and we talk about the kindness. Talitha Kumi literally means, little lamb, it's time to get up. Now that puts a different look at the whole miracle. It takes me back to when your kids were real young, and you'd go up there in the mornings and wake them up for school, particularly in the wintertime, and it's still dark for the time change. And I hated doing it. My wife would always make me do it. And I would go up there when they were just a little bitty and pat them on the arm or, sit down beside them and say, okay, we got to go. It's time to get up. That's what Talitha Kumi means. It's time to get up. And there's a funny thing about that. When they got to be about 14 or 15, you couldn't do that anymore. They would hurt you. And I just got to where I would just turn the light on and run. So I say that to you young parents. Enjoy it while you can. Well, Jesus, does this, and it, as I said, it to me is one of the most touching aspects of this entire miracle, because had it been me, I would have made sure everybody in the house, out in the yard, saw me raise her from the dead. Had it been me, I would have not told Peter, James, and John, or her parents, verse 56, don't tell anybody this. But here, Jesus was more concerned with the girl than he was with himself. And that's the difference between human love and divine love. Human love focuses on the one who is loved. Divine love is based upon the one who is doing the love, or the lover. And it's the nature of God. Paul references this in Colossians 3 in verse 12. Well, let's draw some observations, and we've looked at the three gifts, the three components of kindness, the attention and the affirmation and the acceptance. So there are some observations here from these two stories that I want you to take with you tonight. One, show kindness to family and friends. And you're thinking, well, you may be thinking, you don't need to tell me to show kindness to family and friends. That's a given. Well, it should be, but that's really not always the case. Do you realize, and this is true, I think Ray would affirm this as well, that oftentimes in the process of doing church work, sometimes the people who are closest to us are the ones who get the short end of the stick. And this is true with immediate family, it's true with extended family, it's true with close friends, and that is, okay, I don't have to, I can pop off to them, or I can do this because they understand, they'll get over it. When the truth is that sometimes it's easier for us to perform some act of kindness to a total stranger than it is for a loved one. And when it comes to service projects and other, you don't have any trouble. You don't have any difficulty expressing this kind of attention and all the things that are part of this concept of kindness. You don't have any trouble expressing that to a stranger. But if we're not careful, we'll struggle when it comes to family and to close friends. And so you can't sit back and wait for an opportunity to present itself. And this is where we take the initiative. And rather than just some random thing, how about some intentional acts of kindness for the people that are closest to you? That would be the first one. The second one I would suggest is show kindness to someone who can't return the favor. Let me give you an example of this. Back in Luke chapter 6, Luke chapter 6, Jesus is, and this is Luke's account of the Sermon on the Mount that Matthew records in chapters 5, 6, and 7. Here in Luke 6, verse 32, Jesus says, if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Verse 33, and if you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? Verse 34, and if you lend to those from whom you hope to receive, what credit is that to you? What is he driving at? What's he saying? Jesus is saying, and I think he is acknowledging a very common part of human behavior, and that is all of us, if we're not careful, will gravitate to people that are like us. And this happens every Sunday. You come in here to worship, and you speak to people that you know are going to speak back. There are certain people, every church has them, there are certain people you don't ask, how are you doing? Because you know what? They may tell you. And either you do or you don't want to hear it. And this is the thing about a family. This is the thing about a large family like here. And that is that there are certain people that do require more attention. They do require more affirmation. And they do require more acceptance. And the human tendency is, okay, I just don't know that I have the strength for that today. And we stay away from them. I had a major professor in graduate school, and he shared with us on one occasion. He said, when I was working on my doctorate, he said, I was a part of a small church there, about 200 people, small for that area. He said there are a lot of churches in that town that I could have chosen. He said, but I chose that one because I knew I could get involved. He said, and I hadn't been there very long, maybe a month or 6 weeks, and I developed what I came to understand as Lila theology. And he was reading this passage here in Luke chapter 6, and he said, let me explain it. And he went on to say that there was a woman there in the church by the name of Lila. Lila struggled with mental conditions, and she lived by herself. She had no family. And he said, I'll never forget, he told us, he said, I'm trying to describe her. He said, when she was on her medicine, she was horrible. When she wasn't, she was even worse. She was prone to make loud outbursts in the worship service. He said, every time I preached, she left in tears. He said, now my preaching would do that, but not all the time. And he said, I very quickly found myself trying to avoid interacting with her because she was one of those people that would just suck the very life out of you. He said, but then I noticed that every Sunday after church, one of the families in that church would take Lila out to eat. They would take her out to eat, and then next Sunday, somebody else would take her, and so on. He said, I asked the preacher about it. He said, yes. He said, Lila is a unique individual, and we have an organized group that will, take her out to eat every Sunday because she's by herself. He said, we also have a network of people that will call her every day because she loved to talk on the telephone. Somebody would call her in the morning, and then somebody would call her in the afternoon. And he said, collectively, as a body, we just decided that we were going to minister to her. Now, what did they get in return? Absolutely nothing. They didn't get appreciation because she wasn't capable of expressing appreciation. She didn't, say, hey, let me buy something, let me pay for lunch. No, she didn't have that capacity. But that did not negate the responsibility and the opportunity that this church had to minister to one woman. And I think this is what Jesus is saying here. If you only love the people who love you, what credit is that? If you only speak to the people you know are going to speak back, what credit is that to you? And if you only do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that? He keeps saying, what credit is that? What credit is that? Because it's that accounting mentality. We do everything, we calculate everything we do because at some point we may want something in return. And Jesus says, your kindness cannot come with a price tag. It is not a quid pro quo. You have to express kindness to someone who can't return it. And then thirdly, very quickly, in connection with that, you show kindness when it may not be deserved. I tell our people all the time, and they're probably to the point of really not wanting to hear it anymore, but because of who we are as Christians. Not as, Americans, not as, part of the southern part of the United States, nothing to do with that. But because we are Christians, we are called to a higher standard. And for that reason, let me just be upfront here. For that reason, no, you can't leave church on a Sunday and go to the restaurant and talk to the waiter or the waitress like everybody else does. And I don't care how much you think you're in the right. You can't do that. I've talked to service help in our part of the world anyway, and I've asked them the question that I knew the answer to, and they have confirmed, the day they dread the most is Sunday. Because the customers are the rudest and they are the chintziest when it comes to tipping. And they dread the church crowd. And folks, that's a little thing. That's such a little thing. That the world takes an opportunity to do that, but that's not us. And we struggle all the time about what is our identity? How can we be unique? How can we be salt and light? It starts with the little things. It starts with showing kindness, even when it's not deserved. And I want to encourage you as you finish out the rest of this week to increase your acts of kindness. And it's easy to be kind in some general sense, but it's more difficult to be specific. And as this church in Memphis did, I would encourage you to pick out one person that you can express an act of kindness to, knowing that, number one, they may not can return it, or they may not deserve it. I also want you to remember that the key to kindness is acceptance. But the source of kindness is Jesus Christ. There was a construction project of a high-rise of apartments that was being built, and it happened to be right next to a side street where there was the local hospital. And every floor that it put the high-rise even higher above the hospital. And at one particular phase of the construction, they were eye level with the third floor of this small community hospital. There in one of the rooms was a 7-year-old little girl named Lisa. And she would sit there by the window through the course of the day and watch the construction. And to the days that were transpiring, she began a dialogue with the construction workers. She would hold up a sign and they would respond and asking names and ages and what was going on. And every day they would look forward to seeing Lisa sitting by the window. And one day she wasn't there. One of the guys went down to the waiting room or down to the information table, and they were told that she had taken a turn for the worse and she was in ICU. And at noon, they called a florist. They sent flowers with a card, finished out the day. The next day, there was a sign on the third floor window that simply said, "Lisa has passed away. Thanks for caring." You see, the truth of the matter is that what happens here in Luke chapter 8 to Jairus' daughter is not the norm. Sometimes little girls do die. And sometimes when people go to the doctor, they don't get better, they get worse. But through your acts of kindness and through your love, we can make not just situations like this, but situations that the world cannot address, that the world cannot answer. We make those situations better. You know, the greatest act of kindness that Jesus ever performed was when he went to the cross. Because when you think about it, when he went to the cross, he repeated this again. He gave us his attention. He gave us affirmation. And then he gave us his acceptance. All the while, his life was draining from his body. And all he has asked of us is that we in turn issue and convey this level of kindness to everyone, not just to the people that we like, not just to the people who look like us, and not just to the people that we think deserve it. Because thankfully, that's way above all of our pay grades. And we express kindness because that's what we're supposed to do. Major professor I had in hearing about his this church's attempts at helping this poor woman, he finally asked the preacher, he says, well, why do y'all do that? And I'll never forget the answer. The preacher kind of looked at him like, are you serious? I mean, you're a PhD candidate and you're asking why we do that? He didn't say that. He looked at him and he said, because that's who we are and that's what we do. And I would encourage you to keep that in mind as you work through the balance of this passage. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness. Why? Because that's who we are, and that's what we do. Let's bow. Father, we thank you for the simplicity of your word, as direct and as clear as it appears to be. Oftentimes, Father, we have a tendency to read ourselves out of the text to avoid making any kind of application. And we pray as we leave tonight that we not do that here, that we not do that with this particular text, that we recognize its relevancy, we recognize how it touches each and every one of us. And we're thankful that, once again, if we struggle with the concept, we look at your Son, who has already embodied and illustrated and modeled the concept for us. Continue to be with this church, Father, as they reach the community around them, as they continually cultivate an atmosphere of love and acceptance through the attention and the kindness that they express. All these things we ask in your Son's name. Amen.